Hello.
Good evening.
Hi, good evening.
Let me see what that is. It's the Cullies.
Yes. Hello. Hello.
Yeah. When I logged on just now, it said recording in progress. So I think someone screwed up.
No, it is recording. I see the little red dot.
Yeah, but
It's
no one,
recording.
but he's not here. So what's it recording?
Whoever hosted it.
The two of us. Oh,
I know.
is that your wife in the background?
My wife and the dog chewing on a bully stick.
Oh, both of them together. Very good. It's a lot of fun.
They just got home after a week up in Vermont.
Oh, okay. Good to know. Good to know. So when are you coming down to San Diego?
We're coming when? In June next year, Helen? We'll be there in June.
Oh, very good.
I have to come to services once
Yes.
with you guys, and then I want to go to Habata La Costa.
Oh, okay. Very good. Look forward to meeting you.
Yeah, well,
And I won't be in a black box, hopefully.
no, we're thinking about joining your group to go to Prague. So
Oh, that's terrific. Yeah.
I just got the go ahead today from Bonnie
Yeah.
on that, and then we're going to call the tour company because we want to go to Budapest and Vienna while we're here.
Yeah.
So we're working that. Hello,
Okay.
Rabbi.
Hello, Rabbi Kornberg.
Hello, Cullies. Hello, Peter.
Hello.
By the way, when we got on, it said recording in progress. So you probably have a lot of front end space.
It's because I let you guys come in early.
Okay, good.
Well, we're privileged.
Yes.
So you can choose.
All right.
So we could schmooze up front. Was everything all right last night? You okay? You had Shiva Minion, I guess?
Yeah, unfortunately, there's been a lot of deaths, and so there's just been a lot of Shiva minions.
Well, tell people that they can't die.
I try.
It's much
I try.
easier.
They don't listen to me.
Yeah. Tomorrow's going to be 11 years ago that I lost my mom.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's never easy.
No, it's never easy. No.
My dad's going to be this year. It's going to be 43 years, January 17th.
Wow.
Crazy.
Yeah, really.
Crazy.
Yeah.
22.
Rabbi
Yeah,
Kornberg, did you have your earlier class tonight?
I did.
Wow. So it's a busy, busy day for you.
It is. I have to change between. I go from my office into the Beit Midrash. So.
Aha. Okay.
The other one is just. It's just new. So.
Yeah.
At least you don't have to change into a different uniform.
That's true. That is true.
How many do you have there tonight? I can't see any more than 3.
There are 3 right now, and me.
Okay.
But we'll see if more show up.
Here we come. There we go.
Hillary just popped in.
Yeah, there's. I think 15 million is the number we do. So.
Hi, Hillary. Hello. I'm waving too, but you can't see me. Hi.
Somehow I always feel like Romper Room when we get on here. Like
Romper Room or Brady Bunch. I'm going to start to set up the share screen here. All right, I'm gonna set up the chat here. Get everything all ready to go. Where'd everybody else go?
Good planning.
I don't know where everybody else is.
They're probably doing their Hanukkah shopping.
Shopping? Hanukkah shopping, I guess.
It's kind of nice it's later this year. It's been extra time.
It's true.
Do you have a contact at Isla Tours? Because we want to extend and do some other things.
I'll talk to them, Peter.
Yeah, when you go to their website, they'll give you an email to contact.
Yeah, I saw that, but you don't have a person of contact there.
No. No.
Okay.
Hello, welcome, welcome. Hi.
I think I'm getting you coffee, but I didn't know what you like.
Oh, thank you so much.
Excuse me, that again.
I did get anything. Anything that's caffeinated. Go ahead, those people who are here, go ahead and take the hard copy if you wish. It is good to see everyone. My apologies for last week. I was explaining earlier that unfortunately, there have been a lot of deaths and a lot of critical life cycle events. And so it's made it a little bit difficult for me to be here the way that I like to be here. What we will do is we'll add one more class next week. This was supposed to be the last class, so we'll add one more class next week, and then we'll just make it up as we go. So welcome everyone. It is good to see you, to talk to you. I'm going to, just because I think she's forgotten, and I know they like it too. Let me just give Sarah. All right. So today what we're going to do is start to talk about the more modern sources, right? So we're looking at, for the most part today, 20th century, 21st century. What we're going to see is, as I brought a lot of responsa from the conservative movement and other places, the conservative movement really dug into this issue in the early 1980s. That's when a lot of the responsa came out, and there hasn't been a lot of change since then. There have been 2 new responsa in 2000, I think 3, and maybe 10, dealing with specifically the issue of partial birth abortions. Specifically on that then take us back to some of the earlier ones, but the legal foundations that are there, once we got to Roe v. Wade, right? Everyone sort of started to say, well, what do we do with all of this? And so from Roe v. Wade on, to the end of the millennia is where we saw a lot of the work being done on all of this, okay? So today we're going to look at a number of different responsa, and what I'm going to try to do, as I've done all the way through, is really show you a breadth of opinions that are out there. And then next week, we'll be able to sort of say, okay, now what do we do with all of this, right? How do we take all these opinions? How do we find our own answers? And it may be different for different people in this room, but hell, that's Judaism, right? I mean, that's what we always do. So that's okay. That's okay. All right. Let's see if I can figure this out here. Hold on a second. I got too many things open. All right. So today we're going to specifically be looking at modern responsa and rulings. And the questions that I want us to keep in mind for today are the following. One, do the more modern rabbis follow the original rulings? Which are the ideas that they lean on? Which are the ideas maybe that they dropped as we've sort of gone through from what we've learned? And then specifically, sorry, I need to fix this because this is just not working for me. There we go. All right. That's better. Can't see all of you as well, but now I can see my text. How do the modern rabbis deal with the issue of danger and rodef and all of those things that we've talked about, right, as we go through? So the first responsa that I want to bring is from a rabbi named Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. He is one of the pillars of the Orthodox community, Yeshiva University, and sort of that world in all of this. He actually has written a great deal about medical ethics. It's one of the things that he writes a lot about, but he's got volumes of responsa on all different topics. And so the Orthodox world use him very often as a starting point. And so I want to start sort of with him as well. And there we go. So as we look at this first sort, right, it would be forbidden to kill the fetus, even to save someone's life. Now, the someone here is he's actually responding to someone else, because now he's going to follow that up to say the exception would be to save the life of the mother during childbirth, not for any other need of the mother, which would definitely be forbidden. So he is taking a very stringent ruling here, coming in and saying that a rodef is a legitimate category within Judaism, but it is the life. You know, you save a life when you feel that your life is at risk. And he's going to now expand on that and double down, so to speak. Even for children for whom the doctors predict a very short lifespan, such as those children who are born with a disease called Tay-Sachs, which through newly developed tests can be diagnosed prenatally, it would be forbidden since there is no danger to the mother and the infant is not a rodef, right? So he is going to qualify or he's categorizing rodef in the most stringent way possible. One cannot permit an abortion, even though there is great suffering involved. I mean, he's acknowledging pain in this, but for him, it doesn't pass that legal category of being a rodef. It is incontrovertible and clear, as I have written, a straightforward halacha according to the words of our masters, the traditional commentaries and halachic authorities, that abortion would be forbidden as bona fide murder for any fetus, legitimate or mamzer, genetically normal or afflicted with Tay-Sachs, all are included in the prohibition according to Jewish law. So one of the most stringent views we've seen, still taking into account the idea of rodef, but taking a very strict, stringent view.
But when he says, save the life of the mother during childbirth, does he mean during childbirth? Or does he mean like, if the woman were to carry this child at any point, and he would
argue it, yeah, he would argue at any point, right? Childbirth is the most lenient part of all of that, right? Because the fetus is the most developed. So if it's okay at childbirth, it would be okay to save the mother's life anytime before that, as we go. Sarah.
So not to be the teacher here, but I'm just curious. When I get a research paper and conclusions are drawn, I ask my students to cite their sources, and you can't just say based on straightforward halacha, according to the words of our masters. Like, who actually is he citing, or is this laziness?
No. So the plus and minus of what we're learning today right? Responsa literature, let's actually take, it's actually, thank you for asking the question, because it gives me a chance to make sure that everybody understands what we're reading, right? Responsa literature is just that. It is a response to a question. A rabbi gets a question, or in the case of the conservative movement, the Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards gets a question, and somebody writes a response. The response very often is pages long, right? We're not going to be able to do that today. So today, Sarah, what we've got are the conclusions, and I have chosen to leave out the argument, right? Now, if we're interested, we can then go back and we can say, okay, where did he base this argument on? And we can certainly have that in-depth conversation. But for the sake of time of all the stuff we're going to go through today, I've brought the conclusions. And actually, for the conservative movement, I brought what's called the summary conclusion. It's not even the actual conclusion of the responsa itself. We have what's called a summary index that rabbis have of all the responsa of the Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards, and it's categorized by topic, and then it'll give us a summary of the responsa and then tell us where to find the full thing. So some of them, we're just going to be getting the summary of that. So this is not laziness on his part. He's actually made an in-depth argument. This is his conclusion. I thought I saw another hand up. I don't know if it was.
I had mine up for a second. You know,
Okay.
I just have a very hard time with male rabbis trying to do this without having both sides' perspective included in it.
So you are correct. The good news is that in today's day and age, there are female rabbis that are writing about this as well. And actually, I intentionally brought a female teacher, writer from the Orthodox movement that we're going to learn today. Her name is Blue Greenberg. So I wanted to make sure that we had a female voice from the Orthodox movement as well in here. It's interesting. So many of you know that I'm studying to be what's called a Masader Gitin. It will allow me to officiate and run the process of divorce from Jewish divorce from beginning to end. It's a very in-depth program. I've been learning now for almost a year and a half. It'll be about 2 years total of study on a weekly basis. And today, my chavruta, who's my study partner, she's a professor of Talmud at the University of Judaism, or AJU, whatever it's called now, American Jewish University. And we're meeting with the person who put the program together. And if you think this is bad in terms of lack of female voices, like the issue of divorce is really bad in terms of lack of female voices and lack of actually thinking about the woman's position. And she actually has sat on the law committee before. And I can hear, and I know her very well, I've known her for years, and I can just see the responsa that she's going to be writing after she's done with all of this study, to find a way to have the woman's voice be much more present in these discussions that are very much about women, but don't have a woman's voice. And it's definitely a problem we have with our more ancient and Orthodox texts. In the conservative movement, we now have professors and teachers who are female, who are able to write all these things. And so we're starting to get that now. Okay. So Rav Moshe Feinstein, it says here, as you can see, he was born in 1895, died in 1986. So 20th century, most of what he did, he wrote it in the mid to late 20th century. So the next is from actually one of his students. So they work together, they've done different things, but Rav Moshe Feinstein is sort of the master. This is that next generation master. And the Tzitz Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg, actually really has made his focus on biomedical ethics. I mean, that's really what he writes almost all of his responsa on. And he's one of the places where we go when we're talking about those sorts of issues, whether it's abortion, whether it's organ donation, whether it's anything, right, in terms of biomedical ethics. And you're going to see he's going to take a little bit more liberal view than his teacher. If there is danger to the mother from continuing the pregnancy, one should permit abortion without hesitation. So this actually answers your question a little bit more, Sharon, right? This is anywhere in the pregnancy, continuing the pregnancy. It doesn't just say it at the end. Also, if her health is poor and to cure her or to relieve her from great pain, it is necessary to abort the fetus. All right, a little bit looser of a definition now. Even if she is not in actual danger, there is room to permit it. Well, what does that mean, right? If we're talking about a rodef, if you're not really in danger, then is that a rodef, right? Based on the halachic authority's evaluation of the situation. So many of these rabbis are going to say, speak to your rabbi, right? And help so that you're not making this decision by yourself, but you're being guided. Let's go into the same question then that Rav Moshe Feinstein dealt with. In the case of a baby who will have Tay-Sachs, one should permit abortion as soon as it becomes evident without doubt from the test that indeed such a baby will be born. So he completely disagrees with Rav Moshe Feinstein, and he's saying, no, actually, it needs to be born. Why? Right? Is it because we want to prevent suffering for the baby? That could be a legitimate reason, by the way. This baby will die 100% of the time, right? If a baby has Tay-Sachs. There's never been a baby that has lived past a certain point with Tay-Sachs, right? But that's not where he goes with this. If indeed we may permit an abortion according to the halacha because of a great need and because of pain and suffering, it seems that this is the classic case for such a permission. And it is irrelevant that the way the pain and suffering is expressed, whether it is irrelevant in what way the pain and suffering is expressed, whether it is physical or psychological. So he is the first Orthodox rabbi, right, who's really going to say, actually, we need to start having a conversation about psychological suffering, not just physical danger. Indeed, psychological suffering is in many ways as much greater than the suffering of the flesh, right? Very, very forward thinking in terms of what we've got here. And this is an Orthodox rabbi. This is not conservative.
You know, it's interesting though, working with domestic violence, people explaining this in my own thing often say, I'd rather it was physical
Yeah.
than the emotional. It's
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the emotional scars, the emotional trauma that we carry with us is sometimes very, very deep. And exceedingly dangerous.
It's at the beginning of the end.
Interesting.
Psychological.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Even if it's a serious injury.
Yeah. Yeah. Peter, go ahead.
Most of you or some of you may know, my son Harris, who's going to be 31, is a very high functioning autistic youth. And I've always questioned whether we would have gone through, we had all the genetic testing done and we had amnio. And I've always questioned if there had been a test that would show that he would have been autistic, where would the rabbis lean here? From what it's saying here, you know, it was a lot of suffering to get him. He was nonverbal to age 5, but he graduated college with a degree in jazz performance. But where would the rabbi lay on this here?
So, yeah, it is. This will be, I think, the center of our conversation next week, Peter, because, you know, rodef, mother's life in danger, unanimous 100% of the time, right? We're actually going to see, you know, birth control, pretty unanimous. No, that's, you know, we shouldn't be using abortion as birth control, right? So then the spectrum in between is where it's going to start to get very gray. And Tay-Sachs is not so gray. There are a lot of people, because the mortality is 100%, and the pain and suffering of the parents is so evident. You know, this baby is going to die. Most people, right, with the exception of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, would accept that that's a reasonable reason to abort. Well, now what do you start? When you start talking about Down syndrome, you start talking about autism, you start talking about some of these other things where absolutely this person's life is going to be impacted, but this person can have a very rich life, right? Then it starts to get much more murky in terms of what the rabbis are saying.
And doctors, just to let you know, when he was 2, they told us he would have seizures and he may never speak and all that. And he's never had a seizure, and he graduated college. You know, we had to put supports in place for him. And he has a very rich life as a synagogue musician. He plays almost every Friday somewhere. And
we've had some of our most amazing B'nai Mitzvah here be students who we really came in, we sat down with the parents and we said, look, if all this child does is get up in front of people and say the Shema, we're going to be thrilled. And that very student like got up and read Torah from the Torah. Like, you know, we never know. All right, I see a couple more questions, and we've got a lot to go through today. So Josh, and then Sarah and or Elliot, I don't know which one of you is raising your hands.
I just wanted to offer a similar experience. I mean, we didn't think my kid, they said he should be in an institution, you bar mitzvahed him, and he's an engineer with Caltrans now. Same kind of story. And back then, we definitely thought, gee, if we knew this was going to be the case and, you know, the hardship on our family, maybe we would have chose not to have him. Now I think about who I was 32 years ago, 33 years ago, and I'm a totally different person now. I mean, I just think, you know, to not have that richness of diversity. I've got a colleague.
Yeah, your son is definitely one of those that I count as one of the greatest gifts we've had here, you know?
I was just going to add, I've got a colleague who's got a kid with T21, otherwise known as Downs, who wants to be a priest. And they wouldn't let him into divinity school because he had that, but he can do all the work. And so again, it starts to look like eugenics when you start culling the herd that way. And so I've got a whole different opinion about it now.
Yeah, for sure. Sarah, I'm assuming it's you.
Thank you, and correct. I was just curious about, if you don't mind saying something about the social and historical context around Eliezer Waldenberg kind of breaking away from Moshe Feinstein and having this more liberal view. Do you think it's a result of the context, the historical context, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, or did he seem to come of this independent of that? I mean, I doubt so. Nothing really happens in a vacuum, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, look, I mean, I don't know that much about the details of the history. I mean, I've studied both of them, but I don't know much about their personal lives. Look, you know, Rav Moshe Feinstein is a conservative with a small c, in that he wants to take that sort of most stringent view and only leave from that when he has to, right? As opposed to the Tzitz Eliezer, who I have found is just like, let's just talk about this and see where it makes sense for us to start. And then he goes from there, right? And it's just a different mindset, and it allows him to be open to different things than Rav Moshe Feinstein was. And by the way, Rav Moshe Feinstein also has made some, you know, earth-shattering liberal tshuvot on certain issues, just not this one.
The same text and interpreting it.
Yeah, they're using the same text we're looking at, right? They're using, I mean, that's why we spent these last 3 weeks learning these texts, is like they have no more than we do in all of this, in this conversation. These are the texts. Okay. We are now going to look at some conservative responses. Let me explain something before we do. For those who are unfamiliar with the Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards and the way the conservative movement works, the Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards is a group of rabbis that are both selected and elected. It's a combination. And their job is to write responsa to questions that the general rabbinate has not been able to answer or are so large that there needs to be a movement position on these questions. So the way it works in the conservative movement is I am the Mara Da'atra of this community. That means as a conservative rabbi, as the rabbi of this community, I get to make the halachic decisions for this community, right? Now, if a question comes to me that I don't know the answer to, I could do the research. If I still don't know the answer to that, I'll likely go to one of my teachers. If we still don't have an answer to that, I can then submit a question to the Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards. They can decide, kind of like the Supreme Court, are we going to take this question up? Are we not going to take this question up? Are they going to write, the chair of the committee can write what's called a chair's letter, right? Well, we dealt with this sort of in, 1965, here's the responsa, here's what we think. Or it can really come to the full committee, in which case it will be given to at least one, sometimes multiple rabbis to write responsa on. Those responsa are then voted on, okay? There are usually 18 to 20 rabbis, right? And the way it works is any responsa that gets 6 votes is a legitimate position of the committee. If you get more than 50%, it's a majority opinion. If it's unanimous, it's a unanimous opinion, right? So, but the interesting thing about the way it works is sometimes you have conflicting opinions, conflicting responsa being written, and you're going to see, as we're going to see today, one of them is approved by 11 rabbis, and a conflicting one is approved by 16 rabbis. Well, if you do the math, some rabbis voted for both of them, and they're conflicting. And that's okay, right? Because it's not necessarily about the right answer. It's about, does this responsa reflect Jewish law, Jewish tradition, and the conservative movement? Then what happens is that comes back to me. And I have the right, even if it's unanimous opinion of the law committee, with a few exceptions, I have the right to say, I disagree, right? And I'm gonna make a different law. So for example, we talked a lot about this at the beginning of COVID. It wasn't a responsa, but the law committee came out with a letter saying that you can do minions via Zoom because of COVID, that it was a state of emergency and we could do minions via Zoom. There was a response in the 1980s that came out that said, actually, you can't do minions distance. But they said, this is a special emergency and you can do that. I actually disagreed with that, as many people know. And we didn't do Zoom minions here, even though every other conservative synagogue in San Diego did. We didn't. And so as we talk about law, this isn't like, oh, you have to keep this. This is everything. There are a few things that are standards of the conservative movement that are voted on both by the Rabbinical Assembly and the conservative movement's synagogue wing, right? Those are standards that everybody is beholden to. But otherwise, it doesn't work. So what you're going to see, and the reason I'm explaining this is we're going to look at different summaries of different responsa, and you're going to see what they were approved by. And you're going to see some of them are conflicting, and they were all done at around the same time by the same people as we go through. Does that make sense to everybody? Doesn't make sense to me, but does it make sense to everybody? Peter, you have a question before we go on?
Yeah, but certainly certain things do change over time, okay? Because 29 years ago, I went to a conservative shul growing up. I wanted that for my family. And the rabbi there said to us, we can't bar mitzvah and can't let your son go into preschool at the synagogue because we don't know if he'll ever be able to understand God. And the Reform rabbi said, oh, we'll figure out a way to make it work. And now they have all special needs, services and things like that. So the world does change around and opinions do shift back and forth. And how does this stuff get updated? Is there stuff more modern than 2000?
Okay, so it gets updated. Yeah, thank you. It gets updated by the nature of the fact that synagogues are dealing with this. If you would have gone to another conservative synagogue, they may have given you a completely different answer, by the way. Right? It was that rabbi, that synagogue, who gave that answer.
Possible.
But
when you're in a community, you don't start looking outside usually.
Agreed. All right, let's go back into these texts because I want to make sure that we have time to go through them. The first conservative responsa comes from a responsa written by Rabbi Isaac Klein. Now, for those who know Jewish law and conservative Jewish law, Isaac Klein is the law guy, right? He is, the next best thing to Moses when it comes to giving law in the conservative movement. He actually wrote the Guide to Jewish Religious Practice for the conservative movement. It is Isaac Klein's book. He wrote that in the 70s. Okay, so he was on the law committee, and he actually came out with this opinion. This is a conservative rabbi. Abortion is morally wrong. It should be permitted only for therapeutic reasons. In other words, if the woman's life is in danger, of course, we have to do that. That's Jewish law. But other than that, it's morally wrong. And this was approved 11-1-5, right? 11-4, 1 against, 5 abstained. It is a wide word, but not really in terms of the way he meant it. In other words, there needs to be a medical indication, right? So psychological, I don't think he would say psychological was therapeutic.
Did he clarify the definition of therapeutic?
I have to go back and look at that particular responsa. I haven't read it in a while. I don't think so. And if he did, the sense that I really got from his responsa is that he was frankly echoing what we heard in Rav Moshe Feinstein, which is, if the mother's life is in danger, you can do it, otherwise you can't. That's a conservative rabbi. You'll see, actually, there are a lot of people that were uncomfortable with this. With 6 out of the 17 not voting for this response. All right. The next responsa was written by Rabbis Ben-Zion Boxer and Castle Abelson. It's actually on 2 pages, so we'll go through it. Jewish tradition is sensitive to the sanctity of life, and it does not permit abortion on demand. However, it sanctions abortion under some circumstances because it does not regard the fetus as an autonomous person. These are all texts that we know, right? None of this should sound, new to us. This is based partially on the Bible, Exodus 21, which prescribes monetary damages where a person injures a pregnant woman, causing a miscarriage. The Mishnah in Oholot explicitly indicates that one is to abort a fetus if the continuation of pregnancy might imperil the life of the mother. Again, both sources that we studied. Later authorities have differed as to how far we might go in defining peril to the mother in order to justify the abortion. The Rabbinical Assembly Committee on Jewish Laws and Standards takes the view that an abortion is justifiable if a continuation of pregnancy might cause the mother's severe physical or psychological harm, or when the fetus is judged by a competent medical opinion as severely defective, i.e. Tay-Sachs. The fetus is a life in the process of development, and the decision to abort should never be taken lightly. before reaching her final decision. By the way, let's just make sure that we're understanding the words. Whose decision? Her final decision. That was very intentional. Even though they're going to say she should be in consultation with other people. Let's just clarify whose decision this is. Before reaching her final decision, the mother should consult with the father, other family members, her physician, her spiritual leader, any other person who can help her in assessing the many grave legal and moral issues involved. In other words, don't do this by yourself, right? You should be talking to people that are there, who can support you, who can help you, and who can help guide you through this decision, whether it be family, whether it be spiritual, whether it be medical. Sarah or Elliot? I don't know. Elliot's forward, so maybe it's him. Wow. Okay, Elliot.
Unmute yourself.
I know how to work the Zoom. It's like the Facebook. Okay. I understand that I'm not a doctor, obviously, but I understand that it seems not easy, but at least doable to say, okay, if the woman goes through with this pregnancy, there is going to be significant physical harm to her. Or at least it seems that is much easier than to say there will be psychological harm to the woman. How does anybody, either back then or now, say we can predict with some likelihood or certainty that there's going to be significant or severe psychological damage to the woman, and therefore we have to take certain action?
I would argue the straightforward answer to that is, let's actually talk to the mother, right? And find out what the circumstances are. That to me, I mean, you're right. We can't assume that, oh, in this case, you know, the psychological impact of carrying a child to term is going to be the same for mother A and mother B. We will never be able to know that. The only way we can know that is by actually talking to mother A and mother B and saying, and getting a sense of what the impact is going to be if this child is carried to term.
I did abortion counseling when we had to do 3 sessions before the abortion was approved. And those were extremely helpful to the people who did them, to the women who did them. We did them on the phone. I did. And
Could you repeat that, Rabbi? I can't.
Oh, 1 second. She's still talking. Hang on a second.
I'm sorry.
when that was botched that, I think, unfortunately. Because as I did therapy late in later days, many women define with abortion, it's not an issue for them, they don't feel like they're fine. But many women have issues they didn't realize would happen, which you could talk to them about ahead of time. Right. And sometimes when you talk about that, they realize that there were psychological implications to them, right?
Yeah.
And then sometimes it came later, but at least I had the opportunity to think about what might happen. Right?
So let me repeat what Marge said. Marge, first of all, in case you didn't know, is in the mental health world and in the mental health field. And in the beginning of abortions, after Roe v. Wade, there needed to be, there was mandatory psychological counseling, 3 sessions that the mother had to have, which is problematic in some ways, right? But what Marge was saying is it actually gave her an opportunity to really work with people and help them with this decision. And that there were people afterwards, once that was eliminated, there were people afterwards who, because they didn't talk to anybody prior, there were a lot of pitfalls and minefields that they ran into later on, because they weren't able to think it through prior with somebody. And to me, that's what this responsa is saying, which is talk to the people that it's important to talk to, right? And not that any of those people have the right to tell you what you can and can't do, but they're there to help guide you. And they're there to help you make your decision so that you're not making a difficult decision alone. As you can see, this responsa was approved 16-1-1, right? 16 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstention to this responsa. Sharon, and then Sarah.
Was there anything brought up in discussion about this particular response about how they say that a fetus is a life? Because didn't we talk about that in the first session that we had about how you define when life begins?
Yeah.
And in this particular response, they're defining a fetus as a life, which is actually not how it was defined. Some of the older texts that we studied.
Yes. So there is ambiguity in our texts, right? Of when life actually begins. So there are those texts that say, oh, life begins at birth, right? Or whatever. There are other texts that say, oh, you know, the fetus is actually a limb of the mother. Well, that doesn't mean that there isn't life in that limb, whether it's an autonomous life or not, right? Everybody agrees that it is a potential life, right? And so that, I think, is where they're coming from in terms of we need to take that potentiality seriously, right? That's why everybody is going to come back and say, yeah, this isn't birth control, right? There are other means of birth control, which Judaism definitely, you know, says is okay. But, you know, there needs to be a threat. It's not just like, oh, well, I don't, yeah, no. Right? And this is the conversation, Sarah, that you and I were having, right? Is what we're not hearing here yet, and you're not going to hear it at all, is, yeah, it's totally the woman's choice, and we should all just stay out of it. Right? Judaism says, we've got a system of values, and we're going to say, according to our values, here's what we believe. Now, ultimately, it's still going to be a woman's choice in the same way it is. Am I going to keep kosher? Am I going to keep Shabbat? Whatever. But that doesn't mean that there's not a system of values that say, you know, according to Judaism, it's, you know, traditional Judaism doesn't say it's your choice to keep or not keep Shabbat. You have to keep Shabbat. You're going to choose anyway, right? And so that's what we got here. Sarah, I may have derailed whatever you were going to say before.
No, you actually, it was a wonderful softball, so thank you for that. But here, actually, they specifically say that it's her final decision and that she should, but it doesn't say must, it says should consult with X, Y, and Z. I feel like this is about the closest we've come to going back to that idea of the fetus being a part of a woman's autonomous body that, you know, I think God gives transfers ownership over to, which was one of the texts that we looked at.
Yeah, I would agree 100% with you. I think that's where Rabbis Boxer and Abelson are coming from on this, that they really buy into this idea that the fetus is part of the mother until birth, and therefore, ultimately, the choice is the mother's, the way that any other medical decision about her body should be. Yeah. Okay, onward. Next conservative responsa. This is also by Castle Abelson, right? So he actually was involved in 2 different papers, and they're dealing with different issues. Where there is reason to believe that the fetus may be defective, it is advisable for the mother to go to her obstetrician and undergo amniocentesis and or other prenatal tests. So he's saying here, this isn't a guess. This isn't a, oh, well, we've got it in our family, so maybe. No, you need to know what's going on. And really, the only way to know that is amniocentesis or other tests. If the tests indicate that the child will be born with major defects, which would preclude a normal life and which would make the mother and family anxious about the future, it is permitted to abort the fetus. So this is a very lenient position here, right? The rabbi should meet with the mother and father. Remember, this responsa was asked by a rabbi, and so it's being written back to rabbis, which is why it's being framed here. The rabbi should meet with the mother and the father. It's not being written for the mother and father. And explain the approach of Jewish law to abortion. The rabbi should indicate the gravity of the act of aborting a fetus, as well as extenuating circumstances which Jewish law considers as justification for the abortion. The final decision should be made by the mother in consultation with the family. So what you're going to actually see here or not see here, I'm kind of giving a little bit of this away, at least in these early responses, which are all from the 80s, nobody is going to say it's the mother's choice and we feel that she doesn't need to talk to anybody, she should just do it. It still is the mother's choice, and everybody acknowledges that. But I don't know why Siri keeps doing this for me. But everyone is saying this should be in consultation. You should be talking to your rabbi, you should be talking to family. This is a serious decision, and you should take all of that into account while you're making that decision.
So amniocentesis can be a risk to the fetus too.
Agreed.
Whether that don't, or do they allow amniocentesis?
Not really, because there's no reason for it. Right?
Oh, because you're not gonna.
Because you're not going to have an abortion either way. So there are definitely people that do it, but as far as I know, and I'm not 100% sure on this, I don't believe that the Catholic Church, they don't prohibit it, but they're not in favor of it, right? Because there's no reason. Maybe, right? I mean, it's the only way to know for sure. There have been quite a number of families over the years who, ultrasound has said, of course it's a boy, and nope. Or the other way around. So yeah, amniocentesis is the only way to know for sure. Okay. So we talked about, and this, by the way, was 1502. So nobody objected to it, but there were 2 abstentions. And abstentions, and even objections, by the way, in this context are it's hard to pin down exactly why people do it unless you ask. Right? Sometimes people object because they disagree fundamentally with the conclusion. Sometimes people object because they disagree fundamentally with the argumentation, but they agree with the conclusion. But because this is a legal argument, they're going to say, I don't buy that legal argument, which was, by the way, I've had that a couple of times where I disagree with the legal argumentation, even though I agree with the conclusion. There are a number of different responsa on same-sex marriage, right? There are 3 of them, actually. 2 of them I disagree with the argumentation. 1 of them I agree with, which is why I will do same-sex marriage. But I would have voted against the first 2, even though I would have voted for the third one. It's not the conclusion, it's the argument that gets us there. Peter, you have a quick question.
Very quick. Where is this going in terms of when medicine can get more sophisticated, know that someone's going to end up with heart disease later on in life just from this genetic testing, or diabetes or autism or anything else? Are we getting back to the Hitler matter where we're just going to exterminate people voluntarily to make a mass race?
Excellent question. Next week's discussion.
Sorry,
Right?
I jumped.
No, it's okay. No, but it's an excellent question. I mean, that's exactly where this discussion is going, right?
That's what hit me.
At what point in time does this become eugenics? Right? And at what point in time are we starting to make decisions? By the way, I mean, it's a much broader question, even if we're not talking about abortions, right? We can start tweaking genes. We can start manipulating genes. At what point in time does that become eugenics? Okay. And is there a point where it's okay? Is it okay to say, I've got 3 boys. I really want a girl. Okay, we're going to make sure that it's a girl. Or is that eugenics also? Right? Okay. Let's move. We're running out of time. So I'm going to try to move through these a little bit more quickly. Abortion for population. Oops, sorry. There we go. I'm working too. Abortion for population control is repugnant to the Jewish system. Abortion for economic reasons is also not admissible. Taking precautions by abortion or birth control against physical threat remains a mitzvah, but never to forestall financial difficulty. So instead of going through the whole thing, you can look at it at another time. But this is what we were saying before. You know, oops, birth control. No, that's not actually a Jewish perspective. Financial considerations. That actually, there are a lot of people, there are a lot of rabbis that would say, look, if you really can't do it, that's going to cause an emotional, psychological hardship. There are other rabbis who will say there are lots of parents or lots of people out there who would love to have a child and can't have children on their own. Maybe we should be talking about adoption if it's a financial issue, right? If it's not a threat to, now, obviously that's going to then be a commitment of 9 months and, woman has to go through pregnancy. So that's part of a conversation, but this again starts to get murky as we go through it. The last one. The law on abortion is and should be liberal to meet genuine cases of hardship and misery that are not solvable in any other way. But society has an obligation to educate its members to ethical standards that rise above the level of abortion on demand. In other words, abortion should be legally available, but ethically restricted. Right? That means from a legal perspective, right? I am pro-choice. But if my congregant comes and says, is it always my choice under any circumstance from a Jewish perspective? I'd have to say no. Right? So it needs to be legally available, but there are certain cases from a Jewish perspective that are acceptable, and other cases where Judaism would say no. Men and women must be persuaded that though the abortion of a fetus is not equivalent to taking an actual life, it does represent the destruction of a potential life and must not be undertaken, I don't know why it's an R there, lightly or flippantly. And this kind of goes back to your question, Sharon, what you were asking before is, it is a potential life. It's not just, right? The first 40 days, it's water. We've said that, but what happens after that 40 days? It's not water anymore, right? It is a potential life. And therefore, we shouldn't make this decision flippantly. It should be done with seriousness. It should be done with thought. It should be done with soul searching of what's right for you and your family. Absolutely.
So the morning after pill wouldn't even come into this because it's in birth control.
So the morning after pill, by the way, is considered to be birth control by Jewish law. It's not considered to be abortion. It's a huge difference between Judaism and the Catholic Church, right? Because the Catholic Church would see that as abortion. But by the way, the Catholic Church doesn't support birth control either, right? So it's a problem. But philosophically, they do make a distinction between pre-conception and post-conception, right? But from a Jewish perspective, because it's within the first 40 days, within the first 40 hours, right? It would be considered as a means of birth control, not as an abortion. It's a good question. Okay. Please, if you have to leave, go ahead and leave. I'll probably need another 5 to maximum 10 minutes just to finish everything that we've got. But I want to make sure that we get through it today. So let's actually see, as we're teeing up our discussion for next week. This is a statement by the Union of Orthodox Congregations, the OU, right? Based on the potential of overturning Roe v. Wade. This was actually before it was overturned, I believe. Can't remember the exact date. I think this was before it was overturned. As people of faith, we see life as a precious gift granted to us and maintained within us by God. Jewish law places paramount value on choosing life and mandates, not as a right, but as a responsibility, safeguarding our own lives and the lives of others by behaving in a healthy and secure manner, doing everything in our power to save lives and refraining from endangering others, blah, 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 all the legal stuff beforehand that we need. Now, abortion on demand, the right to choose, are thus legally completely at odds with our religious and halachic values. Legislation and court rulings that enshrine such rights concern us deeply on a societal level. Yet, I was watching Sarah's face as we ended that first one before I got to the yet. Yet, the same mandate to preserve life requires us to be concerned for the life of the mother. Jewish law prioritizes the life of the mother over the life of the fetus, such that where pregnancy critically endangers the physical health or mental health of the mother, an abortion may be authorized, if not mandated by halacha, and should be available to all women irrespective of their economic status. Legislation and court rulings, federally or in any state, that absolutely ban abortion without regard to the health of the mother would literally limit our ability to live our lives in accordance with our responsibility and preserve it, right? So what they're arguing here is leave the Jewish stuff to us and stay the hell out of it, right? If you're going to start to limit, now you're going to infringe on our rights, on our religious rights to do that. And there is a court case that is currently going not by the Orthodox, by progressive synagogues, that may make its way up to the Supreme Court, if it hasn't already, that are saying just that. That I believe it was in Florida, that the abortion bans that are there, the abortion laws that are there, violate Jewish religious liberties to practice their religion. Sarah.
It is in Florida, and it was a progressive case. And my question is, why don't we see Orthodox synagogues taking up this charge in states where there is such restrictive legislation that they could make the argument that religious rights are being infringed upon? Because now the state is deciding rather than them deciding, leave aside the fact that nobody's talking about the mother deciding. But why aren't they also leading the charge and also bringing up court cases? Because it feels to me like they drew a very strong line in the sand with this last part. So why aren't they taking up legal fights?
Politics. I mean, it's really just all about politics, right? It's about partisan politics right now of where the divisions are within the Jewish community. And who's aligned with who for the most part.
But I'm surprised that they haven't come across the case in which they would have ruled in one way, but the state is limiting their ability to rule by.
I don't think that, yeah, I mean, my hunch is, unlike the progressive court case, the progressive synagogues that were doing it, who are going to be proactive about it, the Orthodox movement isn't going to look for a case. If a case comes and they can't, they'll fight it. But they're not going to go looking for it. Okay, last but not least, we have a snippet here from Blue Greenberg. For those who know Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, a prolific author, teacher within the New Orthodox movement. Blue Greenberg also in her own right is a writer, teacher, has written some amazing stuff. And Yitz is incredible, but sometimes I find Blue to be better. She's just a great author and a voice for women within the world of Orthodoxy. And she pushes the line. She doesn't break the line that Orthodoxy holds, but she'll push it. And you'll see here, since there are no traditional precedents for abortion on demand, one way to maintain some integrity within the halachic framework could be to broaden the interpretation of therapeutic abortion. So now she's going to try to define it for us. To extend the principles of precedence of the mother's actual life and health to include serious regard for the quality of life as well. This is actually one of the most broad positions we've seen, and it's coming from an Orthodox writer. And a woman. Although one can envision a halachic stance that urges avoidance of abortion for all the familiar traditional theological reasons, the circumstances under which abortion is permissible may be widened. Such conditions may include the emotional inability to cope with childbearing and rearing, for example. So going back to what I was saying before, right, as to say, well, if this is economic reasons, maybe we should have the person carry the child to term and send it for adoption. Blue would come back and say, wait a second, right? Have we talked to this woman and seen what the emotional toll is going to be on gestating and then giving up this child versus not gestating and giving up the child, right? That may be different here. The need to support oneself or one's spouse through school. So she's actually thinking economic issues. And the time required for a marriage to stabilize, overwhelming responsibilities to other children, and so forth, right? This is the first time we've heard this language. And I intentionally brought it from an Orthodox voice. There are other conservative voices that echo this, but I wanted you to hear it from an Orthodox voice. In these cases, abortion should be seen as necessary rather than an evil. Should be either as a necessity or as necessary. I'm not sure which she meant, but either way. Again, very, very forward-thinking perspective here from the Orthodox movement.
So isn't she considered modern?
She is. Yes, but the modern Orthodox, Rav Moshe Feinstein and the Tzitz Eliezer are also leaning towards the modern Orthodox as well. Rav Moshe Feinstein didn't dress like, a Haredi Jew. He was at YU. He dressed like I would dress. Maybe in black on, but modern Orthodox is a desire and a willingness to engage in the modern world, right? So within Orthodoxy, there are sort of two strains. One is the modern world is bad. It's going to take us away from all the things that we should be doing, and therefore we should isolate ourselves as much as possible, right? That's why the ultra-Orthodox don't have TVs and all those sorts of things. There are actually apps and web browsers that have been created by the ultra-Orthodox community that block out anything but Orthodox websites. Because the technology is great, but they don't necessarily want to have other people seeing that. Versus the modern Orthodox that are going to say, actually, the modern world is amazing, and we should engage in it, but we should engage in it as Orthodox Jews. That's really the difference. Am I engaging in the world, or am I not engaging?
Well respected like a woman in the Orthodox community.
Look, in the modern Orthodox community, extremely well respected, as is her husband. And both of them have gotten a little bit more, I would say, progressive in their later years. Yitz Greenberg now works with an organization called Hadar, which is Rabbi Shai held, and some great Torah comes out of that. And it's a combination. There's conservative Rabbi Shai held is conservative out of JTS, but leans a little bit more Orthodox. Yitz Greenberg is Orthodox, but is willing to have conversations that embrace that. And so, and Blue is very well respected. In the ultra-Orthodox world, no. But neither would Yitz be, right? As we went. Sarah, did you put your hand down, or?
That was my question. Is she well regarded and listened to?
Yeah. Look, we're Jews, and our response is, well, I don't like what you say, so you must not be a good Jew. Like, that kind of tends to be the way we deal with things very often. And so you'll get that for sure. But Blue cannot be seen as a progressive, so to speak, in the way that I am or a Reform rabbi would be. She is an Orthodox, she lives an Orthodox life. She's married to an Orthodox rabbi. And she comes at Judaism from an Orthodox philosophical bent. All right. Any questions? And thank you for giving me that extra 5 minutes or so. Any questions, Rona?
Where Jewish doctors fall.
So the question is, for next week, you know, to give my opinion on where Jewish doctors fall on this. And the easy answer is they fall with the full spectrum of the rest of the Jewish community. And there are some that are out there fighting, and there are some that are out there saying, no, let's just leave well alone, and whatever, you know, so you'll get both.
Is next week the last class?
Yeah, so next week is the last class. Today was supposed to be the last class, but because I had to miss last week, next week will be the last class where we'll try to have a dialogue and a conversation about what this all means, and see where it goes from there. And then what's next? So in January, I've got 2 new classes starting. My basic Judaism class is going to be philosophy, theology. What do we believe as conservative Jews? How do we differ from between Judaism and Christianity, Judaism and Islam? What are some of the fundamental building blocks of Jewish belief? Whether it be prayer, whether it be learning, those sorts of things that we have. So that's in basic Judaism, and I encourage people to join us for that. The winter session that is this time slot is always an obscure book of the Bible. This year, we are going to be learning the book of Ben Sira. It is actually an apocryphal book that is part of what we call wisdom literature. It's really great. Some really amazing stuff in there. And actually, I'll have to bring it. I'll tell you a funny story. When we were reading our ketubah, we wanted to have a quote on there. And being a rabbi and Debbie being a Jewish educator, we're like, we don't want the same quote that anybody else has. So I made it my mission to find something that nobody else would have on their ketubah, right? It's very, very unique. And I found a quote from Ben Sira. And it's on our ketubah, and we will study that at one point in time in the text, so you can see what it is. Say it again. Cliffhanger, yeah, a little bit of a tease.
You didn't just write knowledge is good like Faber College, no?
Yeah, right. So that's what's happening in the winter session, and there is. Rabbi Dahlin is going to be teaching a class as well. So this on Wednesday, Rabbi Jacobson is teaching a class on text in American Jewish history. Rabbi Dahlin is going to actually be teaching a class on Hebrew poetry, some great poetry, and to be able to learn that. And so we've got some really amazing classes coming up. Keep your eyes open. All right, all. See you later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Bye, thanks a lot.
Bye.
You.